I think we saw it coming. The mindset is to toughen things out. All that stress, all that pressure, the necessity to do 20 jobs at once. You are your own support functions. There's no support on someone. Leading a business is a lonely place, even with a co-founder. He came in that morning and he said, I can't do it anymore. Every week is challenging. And every day will ambush you with something.
Yeah.
What we did is probably impossible. We entered a market of established giants. I'd wanted to join the Marines since I was probably about 13. I was a pretty enthusiastic Royal Marine. But curiously, I was one of those people who also probably wanted to leave from day one.
How so?
I suppose because
Steve Howarth, interested in exploring how you went from a stable military career as a serving officer in the Royal Marines to a not-so-stable world of entrepreneurship as co-founder and CEO of Jöttnar, high-performance outdoor clothing brand. So I wanted to kick things off with, I had your co-founder Tommy on the podcast a little while ago, and he related a story where he went to attend, I think it was like your regular team meeting, monthly meeting, and he went in, he literally said, I can't do this anymore, did a 180 and walked back out the door and took a significant amount of time off work. And he said at the time, which is probably only, 8 weeks ago, that he was still working things through, really. What do you remember from that, and what was your reaction?
Well, I think we saw it coming.
Okay.
But the mindset is to toughen things out. It was essentially a stress-based reaction, a lack of control. We had this idea, I think Tommy mentioned it on your podcast, the locus of control. It's not within you. If it's outside somewhere else, that can be quite disconcerting. What I remember specifically, he came in, he'd been increasingly, I suppose, blank almost. So it wasn't that he wasn't performing his job, he was, but he was seeming less personally enthused by it. So these are markers of stress, right? These are red flags.
Yeah.
But there's not much you can do about it because it's a lean team, as it has to be. There's nobody else going to do that job, so you got to lean in. And perhaps leaning in too hard, consistently, with disregard for yourself is not necessarily such a good thing. So all that stress, all that pressure, the necessity to do 20 jobs at once. You are your own support functions. There's no support and so on. And, leading a business is a lonely place, even with a co-founder. I think that just manifested in, I'm not sure if it was ever diagnosed, but some sort of, mini, could we call it a breakdown?
Yeah.
Maybe we could. Such that he just couldn't go anymore. And he came in that morning and we went for a coffee and he said, I can't do it anymore. And I thought, great, needed to hear that. We can work with that because I know you will be able to do it in due course, but we can work with that. And because he's Tommy and selfless and so on, he said, I'll just finish this job. We were about to go on a Norway trip, for example, to meet some distributors out there. He said, I'll come out to the Norway trip because that was his lead. I'll finish this job, I'll finish that job. And I said, no, don't do anything else. Just go home today. So he came down and announced to the team that that's what was happening. And we left it pretty open-ended. He needed some leave. And he was of no more use to the business at that time. In that mental state. And, we'd all been close to that. Of course, that seems to be part of the journey, but I hadn't quite tipped over the edge. And I remember saying to him, he felt embarrassed, I think, because very tough guy, a high achiever and so on. And I put it like this, that mental state is something that has happened to you, not something that's come from within you. In other words, it's a little bit more like a disease that you've caught.
Yeah.
Which I think is a very fair way of describing it. So off he went, and I left him alone for many, many months. Just the occasional check-in to see how he was doing. And Tommy having delivered me, as he put it, the biggest hospital pass ever, I then had some work to do.
If you're enjoying this podcast, can I ask you to do one thing for me? That is to hit the subscribe button. On average, we have just 10% of people who listen to this podcast actually subscribe to it. If you subscribe to it, not only will you be the first person to be notified as soon as any brand new content goes live, it also means that we can go out and get even better guests for the show for you to enjoy. So just take 15 seconds of your time just to hit that subscribe button, and I'll be eternally grateful. Thank you very much.
And yeah, he took a few months off and rebalanced, and now he's back in.
Nice. And what do you learn from that?
Gosh, that's a tricky question. Do you know, Alex? I don't know if there is much to learn from it. I mean, why would you want to learn from it? To prevent it happening?
Yeah.
What could you do to prevent it happening in that situation? There's probably not a lot we could have done. We met many months later and had a very candid conversation about the journey of the business and our roles within it and our relationship with each other. And after 10 years, we're still very good friends, which helps. I think possibly giving each other a little leeway here and there. We don't allow ourselves to give ourselves leeway, but giving each other leeway might have helped, or at least giving the sense of that. Maybe supporting each other a bit more. It was just an unspoken thing that you didn't need to do that.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
Why would you? You're both sort of big, tough grown-ups.
And you're just cracking on, aren't you?
Just cracking on, yeah. Candid conversations and maybe a little bit more support for each other would have helped. I'm not necessarily saying that would have averted it. Just sheer workload can cause these things. Could cause you to be increasingly dislocated, disorientated. And that was probably one of the major causes of it.
And I mean, I assume it must have done, but did it test your relationship? The longer he stayed out of the business, and
I don't think so. No, I could have allowed it to have done that, but I suppose in a purely instrumental sense, Tommy still had like key utility in the business, so I wanted him back. That's a sort of a mercenary way of looking at it. But from a human perspective, I got it. I've been very close myself, and came extremely close after he'd left, having to then pick up that ball and run with it. But there's no choice for me. There was only one of us left. One man down, next man up, and that next man up was me.
And the reason I asked that, literally just had a conversation which I'd mentioned to you with Don McGregor, who was a business partner with Stephen Bartlett in Social Chain, and interesting, like hearing that dynamic because they were so young. They were like 21, 22, 23. And Dom just said he, developed this. His way of coping was alcohol.
Right.
Stephen's way of coping was locking himself away and not seeing anybody. Like Dom was like, I was, the drunkest man in the room, and the hitting the bottom for him was. All of his staff were embarrassed about him because he'd be the drunk one at all the social functions. And said Stephen would just lock himself away in this mansion that he'd bought on his own on the other side of Manchester and just not deal with anything.
Do I think people need to hear these things.
Agreed. Yeah.
You read the sort of glossy entrepreneurial stories, but I've always sought the reality that's underneath those stories, because you can work with reality.
Yeah.
You can plan for it and plan around it and cope with it.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, for example. The story just told me that. I wasn't aware of that. And I completely understand that. Tommy and I were a little older. I think I was 39 when we started the business. That's pretty old, because I had 20 years in the Marines. Tommy's about 5 years younger than me. And, we were both married in long-term relationships. I have children. So there's a degree of maturity there.
Yeah.
I think perhaps had we been early 20s, we would have managed it differently.
Yeah, I think he said Stephen came round his house to confront him and like ready to literally like shout and like let him have it, like get a grip, what's happening, you're ruining his business, or whatever the conversation was going to be. And Dom said it was only at that moment that he asked for help and said, I need help.
Okay.
And I was like, That's really interesting. Okay.
Well, it's good that he asked for it.
Yeah.
Didn't push back defensively.
No.
So he must have really needed it.
Yeah. Literally, as he said, that was the lowest point of my life.
Yeah.
But to be so ill-equipped at a young age to deal with that kind of pressure and those. I remember, those kind of, the brands they were working with, the Nikes, the Pumas, these kind of big guys, and expecting to deliver it. And he said, what came off the back of that was that we needed a management team. We just couldn't do it. Two 21-year-olds running a multi-million-pound company.
Yeah. I mean, Tommy and I, we're not confrontational people. I mean, Tommy's pretty egoless. He's pretty West Coast. And he's very capable and intelligent, but he's pretty chill.
Yeah.
And he can work at pace, but you won't really see it. What all that makes up is a pretty well-balanced character. I'm perhaps more confrontational, but with that character as a co-founder, there's no invitation for me to be confrontational.
No.
There's an invitation to constructive conversation, which has a productive outcome. Being confrontational probably implies panic at some level, doesn't it? Lack of control and panic.
Yeah.
And that's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, it's also something that that you mentioned, Paul, about hearing these kind of stories. I think is good. Like another one of the things that Dom said, which I thought I'd get your view on as well, is that he was like, he goes, I might be completely wrong, but I fear that the next generation will not be resilient because they haven't failed. They're too scared to try to actually fail in the first place and not actually build that resilience. And everyone's just sat on the couch, uber comfortable.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a gross generalization, I'm pretty sure that every generation has said that about the next generation. I'm a very amateur classical civilization historian, and I can find references in Roman writings to exactly that.
Yeah,
complaining about the soft new generation and so on.
Yeah.
It still took 400 years for the empire to collapse. So, and that was for other reasons, not necessarily softness.
Yeah.
And that was a very common thing in the Marines as well. There would be criticism of the group behind you, of the generation behind you,
yeah,
and yet those groups have consistently performed well in combat and in conflict. And in operations, and as good as the generation before them.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy to say that with a little bit more interrogation. I don't think it stands up. I have faith in the next generation. I have 3 daughters.
I got 2.
They run rings around me.
Yeah.
So
That's funny. Like 553 episodes of this podcast never talked about the Romans, and then 2 podcasts in the space of 2 hours talked about the Romans twice. Really,
I could go all day.
I said this book I was reading last night as well. So you met Tommy whilst you were in Norway, both serving for the Royal Marines. How many years did you say you spent in there?
21.
And Tommy was?
About 11, I think.
Okay. And you were Arctic warfare instructor? I
was, yeah. That's a detail here. That's an army qualification. I was on attachment to the parachute regiment on 2 occasions. And one of the remits that the Royal Marines hold is extreme cold weather and mountain warfare.
Yeah.
So I was Arctic warfare trained before becoming an Arctic warfare instructor, and Tommy, of course, was a Royal Marines mountain leader. It's all pretty esoteric, but that's like a sort of rough equivalent of a mountain guide in the Marines.
Okay. And is that where you both got your passion for climbing, for skiing, for the outdoors? Did you have that before you joined?
I had it before I joined.
Okay.
I mean, if I can sort of take you back to how I joined, and maybe
a bit of context, good. Sure.
Yeah, a bit of context. Yeah. So I'd wanted to join the Marines since I was probably about 13, and I was academically very bright. I was an active, physically active, slightly wild kid. All I wanted to do was join the Royal Marines. I have several brothers, and we were all on the sort of O-level, A-level university track, and I did my O-levels. So I'm now 16, and I thought I'd give it a crack. So I started my A-levels, and then the Marines selection was about a third of the way through the A-levels. I think I was 17 when I did it, and I failed catastrophically. I thought I was tough.
Yeah.
And I went down for this course, this initial filter, and I got the shock of my life. And I just thought, there's sort of 4 years of dreaming about the Royal Marines, and I'm just clearly not ready. I remember I had this thought in my head when I was down there. How do I sort of...
That's down in Exeter way.
Yeah,
Right?
Commando Training Centre, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, this is a man's world. It felt just tough and big. So I came back with my tail between my legs. And I had said to my school, I'm not really interested in your A-levels. I just want to join the Marines. They didn't take that very well. I said, if I pass this course, I'm not coming back. If I fail, can I come back? So they were sort of on the fence about that. Anyway, I failed the course and decided not to go back. I needed to toughen myself up. But what lights me up or excited me at the time was travel, exploration, adventure, preferably with a Royal Marines aspect, but that was out of my reach at the time. So I then did something really stupid. I abandoned my A-levels a third of the way through, and I went to sea on an oil tanker as a trainee officer cadet, a deck officer with Texaco. Didn't really want to do that. I had no interest in that, but that was a ticket to travel. And I also saw it. I'm not sure whether this was hindsight or whether it was planned. We'll say it was planned. It was a way of toughening me up.
Yeah.
And that is indeed what happened. You know, I joined this oil tanker. I can remember climbing up the pilot's ladder off the coast of Scotland, age 17, you know, with getting on board, and there's all these sort of 20-year in, hairy, terrifying, weird seamen waiting for their next victim. And so I did that for about 18 months, sort of went to a few interesting places, in the Caribbean and Central and South America, and lots of stuff in the North Sea as well.
And did it toughen you up?
It did toughen me up, yeah. I mean, I realised that later. I spent most of the time homesick, wondering what on earth I was doing. But still, I had this Marines goal. So I came back from that. I was 19 and felt ready, went down, smashed the selection, and then went into the Marines age 19.
Wow.
So that was my story.
From boy to man.
From boy to man,
literally.
Yeah, literally from boy to man,
okay.
yeah.
And was it physically toughened you up? Is a given, but mentally toughened you up?
Mentally, certainly. I knew better how to relate to and deal with people and teams, and diverse teams of interesting characters from all sorts of backgrounds. In the Marines recruit troop will start training. It's about 9 months training, and it will have anyone from a 16-year-old, which wasn't me. It's the odd 16-year-old who gets through, superstar at that age, to a 32-year-old. So it's quite a mix in there. And there's no way I would have been able to orientate myself within that at 16. I couldn't. But at 19, I had some of the edges roughened up and was able to do it. So yeah, I did. I did the Marines training, and then I went to 4-5 Commando, which is where I later met Tommy. Did some bits and pieces, sort of Arctic warfare tours and jungle warfare tours and that sort of stuff. And then I got commissioned and became an officer after about 3-4 years in the ranks, and that's where my sort of development journey went up a notch again.
Okay, and Tommy tells a story of you both bonding on a certain night in Norway. What's your recollection of that night? And I believe Tommy said he ultimately had your professional integrity questions. Yeah. I mean, you've heard the story from Tommy, and that's broadly true. It was, let's give you some context. So every year, the Marines, or a large portion of them, will go out to Arctic Norway to train in this extreme cold weather mountain warfare skill set. Okay. When you arrive, the training's about 3 months long. The first month is survival, movement, tactical, low-level training. So it was at the end of that period. I wasn't being trained. I was then a company commander, so it was probably about 130 men under my command, which included Tommy's subunit as well. He was a reconnaissance troop commander with 4-5 Commando, both in 4-5 Commando. Anyway, that particular night was the final serial of that initial month of training. And what you're asked to do in that final serial is move, I think it's 20, 30 kilometers at night with all your weapons and your kit and so on.
At the end of that, you go through a rite of passage called ice breaking drills. You might have seen the photographs. They cut a hole in an ice lake. You jump, you ski in with your kit on. And Skiing, yeah.
Bloody hell.
And then you have to go through a routine of not dying. And, you know, it has a purpose. If you fall through a lake while you've got that kit on, you need to know how to get out. It's more of a rite of passage. Okay, so this long ski march followed by ice breaking drills. Okay. What I like to do with my company on that course and subsequently was really push them hard. You're supposed to be Royal Marines Commandos. You're supposed to be Arctic warfare experts. Let's really test ourselves. I probably had 6, 7 Norway tours under my belt at the time, so I was pretty comfortable in that environment. And I thought I knew where the edge of safety lies and so on and so forth. Okay, so you stop training in the Marines when the temperature reaches -30, and you just wait for it to drop a degree, and then away you go. And it's incumbent upon a commander. It's one of your responsibilities to make sure that you don't exceed that. It was -17 that night, so we weren't exceeding that. There was some wind chill on top of that, but that can be variable. Okay, so it was safe to go. So off we went into the night, 130 men divided into smaller teams, communicating by radio, over 20 to 30K, and you'd meet at a rendezvous point and then your ice-breaking drills. And after about half an hour of skiing into the night, this would probably take 8-9 hours overnight, this ski march, I started to think, this feels like the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've done a few hard things out here now. And I could hear my troop commanders and the subunits calling in to say, you know, we're having some difficulties. What do they mean by that? Maybe an overall slowing of the group of men. Your main threats are probably hypothermia. You've got to keep moving, or frostbite. So you've got to protect your extremities. But in -17 and below, you know, you take a hand out to read a map or use a GPS. You've got seconds. You've literally got seconds. Right. But if your drills and skills are good, you know what you're doing. There's all sorts of little hacks to stop that happening. Okay, so nothing unusual. I said to the troop commanders on the radios, which were barely working, of course, it doesn't sound unusual. Crack on. And over the course of that night, various subunits were stopping and going into shelter. Now, I thought going into shelter, as in putting tents up, was a more risky thing to do. It takes a while to put a tent up in those conditions. Lots of people are standing still for a long time. Best thing is to keep moving. There were no escape routes off that particular route, or no escape routes that were more attractive than finishing the route. So I sort of bloody-mindedly cracked on. I finished the route. Tommy's unit was fine. The reconnaissance troop, they're all sort of pretty special anyway. They had no problems. So I wasn't particularly worried. We'll pick up the stragglers in the morning. Anyway, which is pretty much what we did. And I'll get to your question in a minute about my integrity and commandability being questioned. Finished the serial, finished the ice-breaking drills, went to a meeting up at Commando headquarters, and the RSN, the Regimental Sergeant Major, very experienced mountain leader, came up to me and said, we've got the old guys down in sickbay, we've got 6 cases of frostbite. Okay, frostbite, no big deal, except in the Marines it is a big deal, and it will get you returned home to the UK as well. Why is that? Because once you have a frostbite injury, it easily reoccurs in similar conditions. So it's considered a source of professional shame on the man, in a way. Right. But there was some top people who had it. I remember one of my sergeants, really tough guy, military cross winner. He had frostbite on his hands, and that would have been for mat reading. Another experience, Norway hand. He had frostbite on his hand, and I thought, crikey, maybe it was pretty brutal out there. Now, I was still in fairly defensive mode. No, this is what we do. This is what we do. Anyway, there was then a thing called a board of inquiry, which is a necessary investigation into the circumstances surrounding those injuries on that evening. Now, I was the commander on the ground, so the buck stops with me. And I went through that board of inquiry, which was a humiliating and difficult experience from from a purely selfish point of view, I could see my career going down the tubes. I knew the lads were okay. That was fine. We linked up with them later back in the UK. No problems there. Tommy got away scot-free because he was a junior commander. But it didn't derail my career, but it set it back a little bit.
It?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was taken very seriously.
But
no one died, and no one got pregnant.
Yeah.
And they were the main things in my mind.
So 21 years in the military in total for you.
Yeah.
Did you have a vision of what life would look like post-military before you left or as you were leaving?
I didn't really, Alex. I only ever wanted to join the Marines. I was a pretty enthusiastic Royal Marine. But curiously, I was one of those people who also probably wanted to leave from day one.
Oh, so?
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose because it's that exploration aspect of my character. I like to explore. I like newness. I like being tested. It's not novelty seeking as such. It's like for me. It's like what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And that's how I conducted my career. I did a series of interesting jobs that kept me in, and when I was ready to leave, another interesting job would be dangled in front of me, or I'd see it, the opportunity for it, and go for it. So I probably stayed in a little longer than I would have expected. As I came to leave the Marines, when I'd finally sort of ticked all the boxes, I'd done everything I wanted to do, and I was both satisfied and probably becoming somewhat disillusioned or stale or bored by what could be next. Then I decided to leave. That was probably a 2 to 3 year process. A couple of years thinking about it, and then you have to give a year's notice.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So I worked my year's notice. Now, it seemed to me that most ex-Marines officers go into one of just a handful of industries. Security, obviously. Well, that looked to me just like being in the Marines, but possibly more dangerous. And Tommy did that for a couple of years, extraordinarily well paid. He was out in Libya when that all went up, and other places in Africa as well, earning a lot of money. Security is one of them. There seemed to be quite a few ex-Marines officers in finance, but that was more of a younger person's game. And then some go into medicine, become doctors, those sorts of things. Management consultancy is a big one, leadership management consultancy. I've never felt warm towards consultancy. I'd rather be doing it. So none of those appealed. What did appeal was starting my own business, and what did appeal was doing something in what Tommy and I sort of vaguely referred to as the outdoor space. Could have been guiding, it could have been making rucksacks. It turned out to be making clothing, which we kind of always knew it would be. So during that notice period, about 3 months away from it, I emailed Tommy, who'd been outside for a couple of years, and posed that question: do you fancy starting an outdoor company? He said, yeah, sounds great. And that was our screw it, let's do it, or just do it moment. We went in on that.
And how long from idea to actually doing it, living, breathing it?
Right, so we got from registering the company, which is probably when the idea, thinking of the idea, naming the company, then registering it, that was pretty quick, obviously. To getting a product to market was probably about 18, 20 months, something like that. The first thing we did was write a business plan, so we did all the research and so on and so forth. And one of the strengths we did have, I suppose, was the ability to plan. We knew nothing about commercial environment, nothing about the outdoor industry. We knew what clothes should look like and how they should perform. We knew we loved the outdoors, and we knew we could put together some sort of plan. Whether it was a tactical, operational, strategic plan, the precepts of that looked no different in the civilian world to the military world. We didn't know that at the time, just applied what we had.
Yeah.
So we put together a business plan and worked out how much we needed to finance it. which realistically is probably about £3 million, to give yourself a bit of runway and breathing space.
In your space?
I think so, yeah.
Kind of gear you're turning out.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think if you've got a good company, you can give it a really fair shake and dominate with an angel investment round like that.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get one. So we started it with £60,000.
Bit different.
Bit different, yeah. And we were facing not being paid for, an indeterminate period, which is exactly what happened. You do a good couple of years without a salary. And at the same time, we raised shortly afterwards a sum a little bit more than that, not much more than that, from an angel investor. And that was an interesting process as well. It was really it felt at times like the sort of Dragon's Den type of show and tell and get criticised and yelled at. And it was literally that. We went to a hotel in Swansea off the M4 or something, where a bunch of potential investors come together, and you stand up in front of them, and most of them are just there for the sport. So we've gone from sort of senior positions in the military to what felt like begging for money and trying to sell our idea.
Yeah.
But it's a ritual you have to go through, and it worked for us. We got a supportive investor straight away, and she invested in us and got us off the ground.
What's been the most challenged you've been since starting Jöttnar, would you say? We talked about obviously Tommy leaving, but accepting that maybe.
The most challenged. It's difficult to discern, I think, Alex, because
every week
is challenging, and every day will ambush you with something.
Yeah.
And in the early days, you're sort of lurching from crisis to crisis. You're not in panic mode. Let me rephrase that. You're lurching from difficulty to difficulty.
Yeah.
What we did is probably impossible. We entered a market of established giants. Our nearest sort of credible competitor revenue at the time was north of 100 million. I think North Face then, they're not really an outdoor brand, they're in a different space now, but I think then their revenue was over 2 billion.
Was it?
Okay, so you're trying to make an entrance into that. You've also given yourself in technical outdoor clothing a serious product challenge as well. It's not fast fashion, it's not gym wear, it's not athleisure. It's difficult to make, very long lead times, it's expensive to make as well. It has to perform, your reputation rides on that. And that for us actually was part of our sort of entry vision, is we knew how this clothing needed to perform. We knew we could make it better and improve it in all the details. So we've given ourselves a hell of a challenge. It was possibly impossible.
And that's ultimately what you're hanging your hat on as your USP to make you stand out from the competition. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's certainly very important to us, and that's something we've closely guarded from the start.
Yeah. Yeah, I always remember Al Barrett from Grenade, and one of the interviews that I had with him saying to me, even when they're whatever they are now, I don't know, however £100 million business, and
really
he said,
well,
I'm chief firefighter. He goes, every day I still go in and I just put out fires.
I love that.
And I'm like, really? Yeah. Still at that stage, really?
Yeah.
Like 15 years in or whatever it is as well. You're like, it's exhausting just listening to it.
I can believe it. And you think, is there some sort of process magic I can put in place here?
Yeah. There
probably isn't, or you probably put it in place and it's run its course, and you're on to the next pressure that you didn't see. I think, like I say, I can't define a particular most challenging point, but one that's persistently challenging is you're always on. You as CEO, you are battered by questions and the need for your input, and that's challenging, and it's your duty to answer it as well. So when you get that text at 9 p.m. at night or whatever it happens to be from your head of product, you probably need to answer it.
Yeah.
Or you need to have a conversation. Don't text me at 9 p.m. at night.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't unless it were an important text.
Mm.
So being always on has been challenging.
And what qualities do you think you've needed to last the course so far then?
I think you need a sufficient degree of paranoia. That might sound unusual.
It's a good answer. I haven't had that one before.
Yeah, I probably stole that, but it's certainly true. No, you need a sufficient degree of paranoia. Why? Because you can see what's coming. You're not resting on your laurels. And I say sufficient, not a pathological degree of paranoia. You shouldn't be running the thing, that'd be extremely unhealthy. You can see what's coming, see what's around the corner, you can plan accordingly and develop contingencies for it, I think.
Okay. What's the vision? How many years in again, remind me?
We are 9-10 years in now.
9-10 years in, okay. How much has the vision changed from when you started to what is it now?
The vision hasn't changed.
Okay.
We wanted to make excellent outdoor technical clothing, and we wanted to inspire people to get out into the outdoors, the mountains, in any capacity, because you recognize how good that is for you, mentally and physically. That vision hasn't changed. Everything else has changed, of course, for good and for bad. But no, the vision remains.
Okay. Best decision you've ever made?
Gosh. These are tough questions. Well, personally, it's getting married to Victoria, my wife.
Good answer.
And no question that's true as well. There's no question. Do you know, I've never rated my decisions. How would you rate your decision? On the outcome, on how it feels? I mean, commercially, there's decisions we made which were proven to be correct. One of them, for example, was in, I think, 2018, we withdrew from all of our retail network, went e-com only.
Okay. Yeah.
The product and the way it's presented and talked about, and the brand is very important to us. And we were finding retailers weren't doing that. So they'd take our clothing and straight away they'd do what we sort of characterize as a race to the bottom. They'd undercut us online, for example, that sort of behavior. They wouldn't share our vision. It was just another commodity that they could sell generally. Plus your margins are eroded by that wholesale operation. And the operational mechanics of it are very difficult as well. With a lean team, that was causing some degree of pressure and stress. So that was a good commercial decision, I think. And interestingly, we were the first UK outdoor clothing brand to have our own trading website. Competitors they had catalogs, but that was about
really?
it.
Even back just in 2018?
Even back, yeah. I think it was about that year that two of the bigger ones, by mutual agreement, decided to go online. They still remain predominantly wholesale operations, but they decided to go online. But that's been good for us.
And I'll ask that in a minute, actually. What's one decision you wish you could have back?
I think it probably comes under the umbrella of hiring. So there's a number of ways you can approach this. You hear this sort of adage of hire fast and fire fast. That's not been a good experience for us. I can't agree with that. Hire right is a better approach. Firing fast causes demoralization in the team. It clearly causes procedure and process burden to make that sort of thing happen. And if you don't think you're hiring right in the first place, it's probably a little bit inhuman. It's better, I think, for a small team to bear the burden, or for you to bear the burden and suffer that gap, than to hire fast or hire incorrectly. Causes more damage in the medium term than otherwise.
Mm.
Now, the difficulty for us was we didn't know what good looks like. So that kind of pollutes it even further. We knew what a good Marine looks like, and we knew what a good mountain leader looks like, or any degree of specialization within that organization. I didn't know what a good garment technologist looks like, a good product developer, a good e-com manager. We do now, but we've had to learn that. And hiring is difficult. You need superstars. Every position around that table must be a superstar. Everyone must be able to carry their own load, and when needed, the load of someone who needs help. If you're trying to enter a market that's so difficult to penetrate, there's only I think a certain number of people who are capable of supporting you as part of your team in doing that. So to back to your question, we've certainly made mishires, and that has slowed us and upset us in ways that were they avoidable? Possibly. I don't know. It is what it is. A bit more care around that, I think.
Yeah, and it's always the biggest one with everybody I've interviewed over the years, is that hiring right and retaining is the hardest things. No matter whether I'm speaking to 10 million turnover business or $1 billion business, it's the same people.
It's all about the people in the room, isn't it? And I think we were naive and trusting. We just assumed when we came out. So we come from this very selective environment, very high standards. This is the Marines, very high standards. A mutually understood sort of mission and mindset. Everyone's locked in. Their own personal foibles are suppressed to serve the wider aim. So we come from that very trusting, high trust environment to a civilian environment where our naivety was such that if someone told us they were a good e-com manager and perhaps showed us a CV with some bigger names on it, we'd be tempted to go for that person. We believed people. There's certainly a lesson there. And you can apply that to anything from accountants to finance directors to e-com people to product developers. We've got over that now. We're a little less naive now.
Before I get to the quickfire round, to finish off, I want to ask, what's the end goal now after 10 years then?
I don't have an end goal. We'll just keep going. And see what comes.
Who's the biggest competitor right now?
There's no one at our level. Like, you can stratify competitors differently. There is a originally a Canadian brand. I mean, it's 50 years old now, called Arc'teryx.
Yeah,
and they were very.
They're Canadian.
Okay. I mean, they're Chinese owned now. They've gone through a number of acquisitions. Owned by Adidas at one stage, and Salomon, Amos Sports, and now owned by a huge Chinese outfit. They were the sort of product and brand to admire. 15 years, 20 years or so ago. There's a rhythm in the outdoor technical clothing market. You start with sort of elite high performance product, and if it's too niche, you've got to go a little bit more broad market. So you start to soften your product. Arc'teryx now is, I think a little bit more fashion forwards. But their technical clothing, their mountain stuff is still great. So they're the people we like to pitch against.
All right. Okay, quick fire round. What was the one thing you needed to screw it, just do it, get from where you were to where you are now?
The one thing?
Yeah, and that can be a person, it could be a quality, it could be an event, it can be any of those. I've had all sorts of answers,
Well, it's people. A mentor would be good. A mentor and a friend, a critical friend. That would be good. That can come from one of your investors. It can come from someone you meet or someone you employ.
And for you, who was it?
I won't name his name, but one of our investors, seen it all before, very chill, patient capital, not perturbed by anything that perturbed me. He was very good.
Are you currently where you want to be?
No, I don't think so. But I didn't think that 3 years ago. And then I look back to where we were 3 years ago, and I was doing this yesterday, and I thought, that was amazing. How did we get there? Why didn't I realize that at the time and sort of soak it up?
Yeah.
But I think that's just part of the pursuit, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, and now talking actions, what was the one action that you needed to take? So if you hadn't have not, the big domino, if you hadn't have taken that action, nothing else would have been possible.
It's a mix, but it's a quick fire round, so I'll give you a quick fire answer. It's probably having a co-founder. I think that's essential. I know investors like it as well.
Yeah.
You bring a range of skills and mutual support.
Good answer. What piece of advice would you give to somebody else who isn't currently where they want to be to help them get to where they want to be?
Well, you've got to think seriously through whether that objective is achievable. And if you decide it is achievable, and that's not a purely sort of technical exercise, it can be instinct as much as anything. But if it is realistically achievable, then you've got to structure a plan, a roadmap. It doesn't matter if that roadmap or plan turns out to be inaccurate. Again, in the Marines, we used to say, don't confuse the map with the ground. It's just a representation of a possible future reality from which you can build contingency. But without it, you're lost.
Yeah.
So build your roadmap, make your map.
Okay. Steve Howarth, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please become part of the growing Screw It Just Do It community by clicking the follow or subscribe button. I've set a goal to get 50% of those who listen or watch the show to follow or subscribe. The starting point is a little over 10% of you, so we've got some work to do. As always, I hope that each episode of this podcast is helping you get from where you currently are to where you want to be.